Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Megan, and I'm one of the events associates here at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. Today, we will be discussing animal protection legislation moving forward together. This webinar does offer closed captioning. To turn on, please click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. We will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation, and you can submit your questions anytime via the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Joining us today is Kim Kelly, along with our Legislative Affairs team. Kim has been the Director of Legislative Affairs for over 6 years and works to develop and advance our key legislative initiatives and to improve and create stronger animal protection laws. So to get us started, I'll go ahead and pass things over to you, Kim.
Thanks so much, Megan. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm so glad that you all could join us today. Let me take just a moment to get our PowerPoint up and running here. Okay, great. So excited that everyone could join today. We're going to be talking about some of the work that we have tackled this year and some of the victories that we'd like to share, and then also talk about some of the work that we have planned for 2025. Just want to get us started by talking about why we work on legislation. Of course, those who have been part of the movement or following the movement or any social justice movement are well aware that there are so many ways that we can improve the world, and whether that is sharing our knowledge and experiences with those in our networks, voting with our pocketbooks or our wallets, working on corporate campaigns, signing petitions, trying to influence how companies utilize their power influence. But here at the Animal Legal Defense Fund, we work through the legal system. And some of the work that we do is filing high impact lawsuits and working with prosecutors and judges to help better the world for animals. But also it's critical to work on legislation because we really can't enforce laws if we don't have good laws on the books to protect animals in the first place. And another critical element of that is not only advancing legislation that protects the interests of animals, but defending against harmful legislation that's brought forth by individuals and entities that have interests that run counter to animals. So it's a really key part of the movement, and one that we're looking forward to telling you about a bit more today. Before we really get underway, though, we're going to have a quick poll just to find out who all is joining us. We're interested if we have attorneys, law students, advocates, potentially other individuals in the audience as well. So if you could take just a moment to fill out the poll, we'd appreciate it. I believe we'll see the results pop up here momentarily. Okay, great. Looks like we've got a good mix, quite a number of advocates, which I'm thrilled about because we're going to be talking about some skills and ways that you can utilize your advocacy later on in the presentation. Quite a few attorneys joining us as well, and a number of law students. Thank you guys so much for making the time to join us today to learn more about the work that we're doing. Let's see. Trying to advance the slide here. There we go. So I just want to take a minute to introduce you to the team. You're going to hear from everybody here a bit more shortly, but just want to share that we have an incredible legislative affairs program with the staff that make up that program, I should say. They all have vast experience working in this field and come from very different backgrounds, so they all have something different to contribute. But one thing across the board that I can say is that they all have experience working in different political climates and different parts of the country. And so what's really neat about this team, even though we're a little bit small for a national animal protection organization, is that we have the ability to work in so many different jurisdictions at the local, state, and federal levels to advance legislation. You can see that our staff are geographically diverse as well. We have Kathleen Schatzman in New Jersey, Alicia Prygoski in Virginia, Stephanie Harris in New Hampshire, Vermont, Jennifer Haig in Oregon, Allison Ludke in Washington, D.C., Lindsay Verhelig in Oregon, and Kat Kelly in Washington. And they as individuals, they work at different levels, some tackling just federal work, others a combination of state and local work as well. And each really is critical because at the different levels, we can work on different types of legislation. Often at the local level, we can work a little more nimbly and work a little bit faster and test out some of some of our newer campaign strategies. At the state level, that's where really most of our work gets done. We can advance most issues in those states because we're a little bit limited federally on the types of issues that we can work on and with the legal mechanisms that are available at our disposal. So you'll hear mostly about state work today, but also some really exciting federal work that we're taking on as well. So what type of legislation do we work on? We have three major strategic objectives that we undertake, and then some other opportunities as well. Our most critical campaigns are our farmed animal campaigns, and that's because farmed animals really make up the largest numbers of animals and those who suffer the most in terms of the types of cruelty that we're trying to address. And so the legislation that we primarily prioritize in that space is working against strict confinement, CAFO moratoriums, and more recently, octopus farming, which in this space is a really unique opportunity for us to actually prevent harm from occurring before it even begins. And you'll hear more about that here shortly. We also work on wildlife campaigns, and that includes both wildlife in the wild as well as captive wildlife. And that's legislation for things like roadside zoos and public contact bans, working to ban circuses and also wildlife killing contests. And then we work on animal status. And the idea there, really the epitome is enacting legislation that expands the recognition of animals as living, feeling beings. So working on legislation that recognizes them as victims of crimes, passing legislation that would afford possession bans for people who are convicted of animal cruelty, cost of care or pre-conviction forfeiture so that animals don't languish in shelters during a long protracted criminal case, and also things like animal custody. So the best interest of the animal being considered in divorce cases, for example. There are many, many other issues that we work on under each of these subcategories, but those are just a handful of the main campaigns that we take on. And then finally, we're also opportunistic during the legislative sessions. Sometimes the bills that we're working on don't advance for various reasons, but there are other animal protection bills that might be moving forward in those places, and we can offer our assistance and our support to help advance those. And so in those instances, we can support our coalition partners or animal-friendly lawmakers who have other animal priority bills. And that can sometimes not only support and advance those issues in their own right, but of course, it can free up space for us to advance our priorities as well. So in 2024, thus far this year, we've had 24 legislative victories. That includes the passage and enactment of 18 new laws, defending against 16 problematic bills that were brought forth. And then we had a number of advocacy events that we hosted as well, things like Humane Lobby Days at the state houses, where advocates join and directly lobby their lawmakers, asking them to support or oppose legislation as needed, which are great opportunities for you to get involved if you haven't had a chance to do so thus far. What isn't captured here, though, is just some of the other incremental victories that we have. Sometimes it's just the introduction of a really key piece of legislation that gives rise to conversation and helps move the needle forward on animal protection issues. So there's been a slew of those victories this year as well, which you might hear about here shortly. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the team to give you some of the highlights from the year and let you know what's ahead for 2025.
Thank you so much, Kim, for that impressive summary of the work that we do and for the introductions. Truly is just the tip of the iceberg for what we do here in LAP. So hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Veer-Heilig. I am one of LAP's legislative affairs managers. Like Kim said, I'm physically based in Salem, Oregon, but my legislative portfolio spreads throughout the country, including Hawaii, Missouri, Nevada, Ohio, and Wisconsin, where I monitor, develop, and support animal protection legislation. However, I started out this year more broadly engaging in legislation throughout the country, largely focusing on on working to defeat bad bills, or like we call opposition bills, which is what I'll largely be talking about here today. So unfortunately, a good amount of LAP's time is spent working to defeat these bad bills that could potentially harm animals. There's no shortage of them every year. And this year, some of them included ag-gag bills, exemptions to wild animal protections, and preemption bills. We're not always successful in blocking a bill. It's often an uphill battle. So we definitely celebrate the victories when we can get them. So we did have a number of those victories this year, and that includes in Minnesota, where there was a bill brought to basically undermine the state's law on the importation of deer species to allow substandard facilities to import and breed deer from other places. So I worked within a coalition of other organizations to educate lawmakers on why this would be harmful, and we were luckily successful in convincing them that weakening their existing laws would have negative impacts on the wild deer populations there in Minnesota. You'll also see on the slide several times the word preemption. These preemption bills have been popping up all over the country over the past few years, and essentially they aim to block counties and cities from enacting local animal protection legislation. Some are pretty broad to block municipalities from regulating any industry that animals are involved in. So those are often called working animal preemption bills, and they include rodeos, circuses, even horse carriage rides. And then some are more narrowly tailored, for example, preempting municipalities from enacting bans on the sale of animals at pet stores or retail sales bans. And as many of you already know, retail sales bans are a powerful way for communities to fight puppy mills. They limit the supply and demand of mill-bred animals when mills can no longer sell to pet stores. And at ALDF, we're committed to protecting this right of local governments and residents like you to enact these bans to protect your local towns. So that the latter type of preemption is what we've been seeing more and more of recently, thanks to industry groups reacting to the great success that advocates have had across the country enacting these bans. And specifically in Missouri, we've been fighting for several years to keep this kind of pet store preemption legislation at bay, and luckily have been successful so far. We've also seen it in several other states, including in Kentucky, which also successfully failed, like I like to say. And then Missouri also saw another kind of preemption bill this year and the year before, which would have reversed the existing cat declaw bans in St. Louis County and in the city of St. Louis. So we successfully blocked these bills, luckily, thanks to the hard work of a strong network of coalition members and also input from the public. So looking ahead to 2025, I do anticipate more opposition work, particularly preemption in states like Missouri and also Wisconsin. But I'm also optimistic that we can get some positive laws on the books for animals as well. For example, in Missouri, one piece of legislation that we are excited about would require police officers to undergo training included in their basic training programs to be able to respond appropriately and humanely to encounters with dogs. We unfortunately developed this legislation on the heels of a really tragic incident earlier this year in Sturgeon, Missouri, where an officer fatally shot a 13-pound blind and deaf Shih Tzu named Teddy after they were called to retrieve Teddy from a neighbor's yard. The incident obviously rightly sparked outrage throughout the town, and it also shed light on a problem that is actually a lot more widespread than people realize. So we're hopeful that if it's passed, this legislation can bring kind of like more peace of mind to police officers by equipping them with the ability to better handle these encounters and also save the lives of dogs like Teddy and their families from really, truly unnecessary heartache. Also in Missouri, we're gearing up to introduce a bill that would require more transparency in universities that use public funds to engage in animal testing. So this would require institutions to file annual reports with the types of tests done, the number and kinds of animals used, and how much money was spent on these tests. We're hopeful this kind of bill would bring awareness to some of the more egregious tests that are done on animals and allow the public to be more informed on where their money is being spent, and also encourage universities to reduce the use of animals in research in favor of humane, effective alternatives. I will wrap up with one final bill that I'm excited about, which is an octopus farming ban bill in Hawaii. And I'll shortly pass it over to Jennifer to talk about her phenomenal success in 2 other states this year. But basically, as we're learning more and more about the amazing and often otherworldly abilities of octopuses, as well as the detrimental impacts of aquaculture, we're also learning that more research is being done internationally on intensive octopus farming as a sustainable food source. So this legislation aims to protect octopuses from this cruel practice and also protect Hawaii's incredible marine wildlife and habitats by preventing the industry from taking shape in the state altogether. And yeah, this is just a small snapshot of what's to come in the states that I cover. We're always engaging with other groups and advocates on the ground, supporting and sometimes opposing bills as they come up. And as you'll hear throughout the rest of the presentation, one of the most effective tools we have is the voice of our supporters. So please be on the lookout for more updates and ways to get involved. Thank you so much. And I will pass it to my colleague, Jennifer Haig.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. That was a great segue into what I'm going to talk about, as you can see by the main visual on this slide of the octopus. So again, my name's Jennifer Haig, and I manage mostly the Western region and those states for our program. That's primarily proactive and defensive work in California, Oregon, Washington, Arizona, and Texas. And I'm going to give you a few highlights from 2024 wins, and like Lindsay just did, preview a little bit of what's to come in 2025. So I'm actually going to reverse the order that the text is listed on this slide and start in Washington, because to carry on from what Lindsay just mentioned, Washington was the first legislation in the world to ban octopus farming. This is an effort that we supported that was led by a partner organization, Animal Rights Initiative, which is based in Washington. They got it going and we came on board to support what they had already started. I will say the bill received overwhelming bipartisan support in both chambers, and rather uniquely to a lot of the work we do, no opposition. Part of that is due to the fact that this is a preemptive ban. Octopus farming does not yet exist anywhere in the world, although industry is making forays into research to figure out how to successfully do it. So we believe that this being a preemptive measure was easier for lawmakers to say yes to. Specifically in Washington, we played up on the history of the salmon net pen disaster off their coast for an environmental rationale for why they wouldn't want to extend that level of aquaculture industry where it had already been a problem. The unique thing about this issue overall, and it wasn't just in Washington, but in other places that we did it and are looking to do it in next year and beyond, it allowed an opportunity to talk about 2 important concepts in a less confrontational way. And that is first, animal sentience. This is a particularly charismatic wildlife species that people are well familiar with, especially on the heels of the popularity of the Oscar-winning documentary, My Octopus Teacher, as well as the fact that it enabled us to have a conversation about factory farming in a different way. By not wanting to add another species to the list of already intensively farmed animals, it allowed people to extrapolate the conditions to existing farmed species, which hopefully opens the door to future movement on other bills. So after the success in Washington, we offered up our services as experts in California and the legislative process there to repeat and really take a step further what we'd started in Washington. And in doing that, we actually were able to do both an octopus farming and a sales ban and successfully pass that legislation this year. We had done so as co-sponsors with another group we work with a lot called Social Compassion and Legislation. So this was the second farming ban to pass in the United States, but the first sales ban. And I will say the idea came from Proposition 12, that was a 2018 ballot initiative that codified confinement standards by banning hen cages, gestation crates for pigs, and veal crates for calves on any products sold in California. So we felt that it already kind of given permission, been granted or reinforced by the Supreme Court upholding the law that it allowed for the sales ban component to be added on, and to do that in California just made sense. And that's now the standard for model language in future octopus farming bans, which you'll see in 2025. The other success we had in California was in the area of rodenticides. Back in 2018, we had passed a rodenticides moratorium, which had started with a few of the most poisonous of the rodenticides. And so this is now what we passed in 2024 was a third of 3 bills that we've been working on for 6 years. And this one added the remaining 2 first-generation anticoagulant rodenticides to that moratorium that we originally passed in 2020. So this now makes California the state with the most stringent restrictions on anticoagulant rodenticides in the nation. And this is great because rodenticides cause secondary poisoning to predators that eat the poisoned rats and makes for a very slow and painful deterioration over time that contributes to an early death. So given those successes, looking forward to 2025, in California, I can tell you we are working on a cat declaw ban to continue the work that we have been doing in some other states on that same issue. And then there is a great appetite to do something in the space of puppy mill prevention. California was the state that actually passed a retail pet sales ban, the first to pass such a ban. However, that sort of shifted the industry to online sales, and there still is a puppy mill pipeline that is flowing into the state. It's a little too early to mention specifics, but because of awareness that's been driven by media on the issue in the state, the legislature is primed and ready to take action on this issue. And we and other groups that have been involved on puppy mill issues for the past 5+ years have been in talks with each other about what concepts we'll be bringing forward. So stay tuned for specifics on that. In Oregon, I can tell you that we will be working on a ban on CAFOs in groundwater management areas. And this is a follow-up to a success we had in 2023 with a factory farm regulatory bill that was passed from what started out as a CAFO moratorium. So this is part of our strategy of chipping away at the confined animal feeding operation, or CAFO, issue. I can tell you that Oregon will also have an octopus farming and sales ban, in addition to several East Coast states that my colleagues may mention when they give their parts of the presentation. And an aquaculture bill that would also be very novel legislation, first of its kind in the United States, with the objective being to ban ocean net pens, similar to what they'd had problems with in Washington, and limit stocking density on land-based fish farms, which is the most relevant part from an animal welfare perspective of that bill. Finally, just 2 more highlights from Washington. There will also be a cat declaw ban bill coming down the pike. And in Texas, another bite at the apple for a retail pet sales ban, which will be called the Ethical Pet Sales Bill. So look out for that one. Lindsay had mentioned the preemption issue. That's also a problem in Texas, where in 2023, a very broad preemption bill stopped further local ordinances on this issue. So until we get a state ban, that would be the only way to prohibit continued proliferation of pet stores selling puppies and kittens that primarily come from puppy mills. So that's the news from the West, and I believe I am passing it to Kathy.
All right, thank you so much, Jennifer. And the West Coast really is leading the way on aquaculture. And that was a great segue into my portion on retail sales bans. And my name is Kathleen Schatzman, Strategic Legislative Affairs Manager, and I'll be presenting on New York and New Jersey today. So let's start with New York first, as we have some very exciting news to share. In 2022, the New York legislature enacted a law that would end the puppy mill pipeline. ALDF worked alongside a strong coalition on this years-long campaign because we know that selling commercially raised puppies, kittens, and rabbits in pet stores raises serious animal welfare and consumer protection issues. By prohibiting pet stores from selling dogs, cats, and rabbits while encouraging them to transition to a pet products and services model, lawmakers are protecting animals and consumers while promoting humane businesses. So what's the current good news? Well, we're happy to announce that the enactment date of that New York law is December 15th. That's next week and right before the holiday season. Pet stores were given 2 years to comply with the law, which has been more than ample time to transition. And if they continue to sell animals named in the legislation, those puppies, kittens, and rabbits, they can face penalties of up to $1,000 per violation. And I do want to note that this prohibition does not impact responsible breeders who sell the dogs they breed directly to families. And it still allows pet stores to start or continue their partnerships with local animal shelters and rescue organizations to showcase homeless animals for adoption. It truly will be a humane holiday in New York this year. Now, moving to New Jersey, the New Jersey legislature is considering a similar humane pet store bill. The bill has garnered overwhelming bipartisan support, with nearly half of the entire legislature signed on as a sponsor. And we anticipate bill movement on Monday. So this is all super timely. It really is important to note that without legislative action, New Jersey will likely see an influx of puppy mill retail outlets as a result of New York State's law, which impacts over 50 stores. 2 New York puppy mill outlets have already moved to Connecticut, and we want to ensure the doors closed for those bad actors to set up shop in the Garden State. Now, looking forward in 2025, in New York, we will continue working on a ban on captive wildlife in traveling acts, as well as support an octopus farming ban. There's going to be a theme here on that subject. And in New Jersey, we will also be supporting an octopus farming ban, and we'll continue our advocacy for the Humane Pet Store Bill, for wildlife killing contest ban, and work to secure civil immunity for people who, in good faith, rescue an animal from a motor vehicle under dangerous conditions. So that's the update from New York and New Jersey, and I am now going to pass it on to Kat Kelly.
Thank you, Kathy. Hello, everybody. I'm Kat Kelly, ALDF's new Legislative Affairs Fellow. So 2025 will be my first legislative session working with ALDF, and I will be monitoring bills across several states while supporting the work of our other wonderful legislative affairs managers. For today, I'm going to be covering the highlights and sneak peeks of both Stephanie and Alicia's work while they are out of the office. So to get started with Stephanie, in addition to helping host several events throughout the year, like Humane Lobby Day and Pause in Policy, Stephanie helped several bills become law in Massachusetts. The first bill, which ALDF was a core coalition member on, was called Ollie's Law. This bill was named after the dog, Ollie, who was brought to a doggy daycare and then had to be promptly taken to the vet after being mauled by other dogs at the daycare. Unfortunately, Ollie did not survive the injuries. After this incident, Ollie's pet parent worked with other families who have faced similar tragedies, responsible doggy daycare owners, and animal protection organizations like ALDF to turn Ollie's legacy into a law which requires regulations and minimum standards for certain types of kennels, such as daycares and boarding facilities. This bill was signed into law on September 20th. ALDF was also an active supporter of the Coercive Control Bill, which was signed into law on June 21st. This law adds coercive control to the Commonwealth's legal definition of abuse. For those who don't know, coercive control is a way for an abuser to exert control over a family or a household member through threats, intimidation, harassment, and many more means. This law includes committing or threatening to commit cruelty or abuse to an animal who is connected to the abuser's family or the household member as a form of coercive control. This inclusion means that victims and survivors, both humans and non-humans, will have access to better legal protections when faced with coercive control by their abuser. Another exciting bill, which ALDF helped lead a coalition on, was signed into law on August 9th. This bill was titled An Act Relevant to the Use of Elephants, Big Cats, Primates, Giraffes, and Bears in Traveling Exhibits and Shows, or more simply, the Circus Bill. The Circus Bill prohibits the use of certain wild animals in circuses and traveling shows in the Commonwealth. Many wild animal exhibitors who perform in Massachusetts have had track records filled with Animal Welfare Act violations and dangerous public safety incidents tied to the performances with wild animals. But the passage of the Circus Bill means that Massachusetts has now joined the ranks of 8 other states and nearly 150 other localities in 37 states across the country with similar restrictions aimed to protect wild animals from the harms which are associated with being forced to perform in traveling shows. Finally, Massachusetts also passed a law which requires a breed-neutral approach to determine whether a family can adopt or foster children. What this means is that currently the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families regulations actually prevents a family from adopting or fostering a child based on whether that family includes a dog of a certain perceived breed or a mix that includes such a perceived breed. This law, however, will ensure that the mere perception of a dog breed is no longer enough to prevent a family from adopting or fostering children in need. Additionally, at the recommendation of Massachusetts Paws 2 Commission on Animal Cruelty Reporting, this law also clarifies the timeline for reporting suspected animal cruelty to ensure that employees and contractors of human services agencies may report animal cruelty when they suspect it, including during and beyond the 10-day investigation period that currently exists. Over in Rhode Island, Stephanie has had 2 major victories she wanted to highlight. First is the captive hunting prohibition, which was signed into law on June 24th. Captive hunting, which is also known as canned hunting, is when participants can pay money up to thousands of dollars to kill confined animals on private land. Not only is this harmful to the animals who might be genetically altered to grow abnormally large trophy attributes, such as excessively large antlers on a deer, but it is harmful to both the environment and the native wildlife of the area due to the risk of these non-native captive animals escaping and the increased risk of disease spreading between the captive and wild animal populations. This captive hunting prohibition defines and prohibits captive hunting for virtually all animals throughout the state, thus saving the lives and well-being of countless individuals. Finally, signed into law on June 26th, the Act Relating to Domestic Relations, Divorce and Separation is a law which now requires courts to consider important factors relating to an animal's interests when awarding sole or joint custody of a companion animal in divorce or separation proceedings. This has created a multi-factor evaluation that is based on the animal's best interests, which helps to ensure that companion animals will be treated and handled as a member of the family during these proceedings and not merely as inanimate property to be divided when their guardians separate. Looking forward to 2025, Stephanie is going to continue building on her successes through additional pet custody bills, as well as domestic violence protections and puppy mill bills like Kathy discussed to better protect pets and consumers. All right, and now I will switch over to sharing work from our Legislative Affairs Manager, Alicia, who has also had several exciting victories and updates in 2024. Starting with Florida, she co-hosted a Humane Lobby Day where she brought in advocates from across the state to the Capitol to advocate for animal protection bills. She also worked hard to help the balloon release ban be passed into law. What this law does is ban balloon releases in Florida to help protect the state's wildlife. For those who don't know, balloons are one of the deadliest kinds of ocean trash for wildlife because the animals will frequently ingest the deflated balloon waste after it pops and sinks back down to earth, and they'll choke. Passing this law has been a major step forward for endangered species and all wildlife animals who are at risk of ingesting balloon waste. In Michigan, Queenie's Law is currently making its way through the legislative process, and this bill, if signed into law, would prohibit the painful experimentation on dogs at public institutions. Currently, dogs can be subject to cruel experimentation, which may leave them with permanent physical trauma and can even kill them. Alicia is currently working with legislators to see Queenie's Law to completion and to protect dogs across the state from these invasive and deadly experimental acts. Alicia has also helped to introduce a Courtroom Animal Advocate Program bill, or CAP, in Michigan this past fall. So CAP is a program which allows legal practitioners, meaning supervised law students or volunteer lawyers, to advocate for animal victims in criminal cruelty cases. What happens is volunteers will appear in court and assist the judge by drafting briefs, conducting research, gathering information from veterinarians, animal control officers, and law enforcement officials so that they can make recommendations on behalf of the animal victims' interests. In order to get this bill introduced, Alicia has put a tremendous amount of work into background preparation and stakeholder outreach so that hopefully someday soon, we will see animal victims better represented and protected in criminal cruelty cases. Finally, in Illinois, there is ongoing work to implement a state-level cat declaw ban. Simultaneously with this work, ALDF has been working to pass declaw bans or resolutions in support of a declaw ban at local levels. For example, Buffalo Grove in Illinois passed one such resolution early this year, and several other municipalities are considering the same. In fact, very exciting, just 2 days ago, an ordinance which bans cat declawing was passed by a unanimous vote in Evanston City, Illinois. This progress in all of Alicia's work is making us really optimistic for the future, as she plans to continue working at local and state levels through the next year to protect cats from these unnecessary and painful declawing procedures. All right, thank you for listening, and now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Allison to share her exciting work.
Thanks so much, Kat. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Allison Ludke, and I'm the Legislative Affairs Manager who handles the federal portfolio for ALDF. I also keep tabs on issues in the DC Council because I live here. As you've heard a lot about octopus farming, I'm going to continue that theme. And I would have to say that was one of the most exciting highlights of the 118th Congress, the introduction of the Opposing the Cultivation and Trade of Octopus Produced Through Unethical Strategies, also known as the Octopus Act. Can't take credit for the name, but had to give it a shout out, by Senators Sheldon Whitehouse and Lisa Murkowski. This bill would ban commercial octopus farming in the US and prohibit imports of farmed octopus from other countries. As many of my colleagues have noted, this issue has gained traction in state legislatures across the country. Although there are no facilities currently farming octopus in the US, the growing research on octopus sentience, coupled with compelling media coverage of this issue, and Nueva Pescanova's attempt to open the first aquaculture facility in Spain, has driven interest in preempting this industry before it starts. We're hoping to have a House version introduced alongside the Senate version next Congress, and we'll be using the growing number of state bills to support the need for a federal ban. Moving on to another exciting highlight, that was the successful reintroduction and campaign surrounding the Captive Primate Safety Act, which prohibits the private possession of non-human primates and the sale or transportation of non-human primates for the pet trade. Although this legislation has been around for years, the release of the HBO docuseries Chimp Crazy, which I'm sure some of you saw, documents the complicated landscape of private chimp ownership in the US and gave proponents of the bill an opportunity for mainstream interest, a la Tiger King. We saw an uptick in congressional interest after the release of this docuseries and are working with a strong, diverse coalition of stakeholders, ranging from zoos to law enforcement, to keep this issue on Congress's radar. We are hopeful that this will follow the lead of the Big Cat Public Safety Act in the 119th, and are focused on continuing to garner bipartisan support for this issue. Moving to the next bullet point, the last two actually have to do with the appropriations process. So I won't get too in the weeds, but as a quick overview, Congress must fund the government every year by passing 12 appropriations bills. It's become the norm for these bills to be combined into a larger legislative package, which is referred to as an omnibus. Although this legislation should technically only pertain to the funding of programs, there are opportunities to include what is referred to as authorizing language, which is related to policy implementation. Each appropriations bill is accompanied by a report which explains in detail how the allocated funds within the bill should be used by federal agencies and provides further insight into the congressional intent regarding the spending of these funds. Essentially, it's a written explanation of the reasoning behind the funding decisions made in the bill and can also provide directives to the agencies. We focus a good amount of our efforts here, as it's a lot easier to influence guidance on how money is spent versus actually securing funding. Currently, as some of you may know, Congress is still working through the fiscal year 2025 bills. Technically, the deadline is September, but it's not unusual for it to get extended to the end of the year. And they're currently working on passing what's known as a continuing resolution. This will extend the current funding levels until next year. The deadline is to be decided, but we should be hearing what they decide on either this week or next. And so some background on our appropriations engagement. The main bill we engage with is the Agriculture, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration bill, which is responsible for funding a handful of agencies, including the United States Department of Agriculture. The USDA implements and enforces the Animal Welfare Act, which was mentioned earlier, and is the primary federal law in the US that regulates the treatment of animals. It is notoriously poorly enforced and has been at the forefront of many of ALDF's lawsuits. ALDF's litigation team has worked extensively on issues related to USDA's confiscation authority under the Animal Welfare Act and the gap that currently exists in the law's regulations, which prevents USDA from removing animals from facilities whose conditions are so atrocious that the agency has revoked or terminated their license. We often refer to this policy as revoke and run. In approaching this issue legislatively, we advocated for and were able to secure language in the House Agriculture Appropriations Report directing USDA for increased transparency and reporting on enforcement actions and confiscations. Although this doesn't change the policy, this added information will be immensely helpful in determining what roadblocks are preventing the agency from enforcing this and how we can work with them to better improve their enforcement of the Animal Welfare Act. Pivoting to the Senate Agriculture Appropriations Bill, we assisted in securing language for the second year in a row, preventing wildlife services from using M44 devices. As some of you may know, Wildlife Services is a program that sounds good in theory, but it's within the USDA and tasked with managing, mostly through lethal methods, what they refer to as wildlife damage. M44 devices, also known as cyanide bombs, are one of the most indiscriminate and inhumane methods used. These devices are spring-loaded, staked into the ground, and often baited with a sweet scent to lure wildlife, mainly predator species. When pulled, sodium cyanide is sprayed, and unfortunately, a torturous poisoning soon follows. Last year, the Bureau of Land Management decided via MOU to prohibit the use of these devices on BLM managed land. And the appropriations language complements this, as Wildlife Services operates on managed public lands and private ones as well. We will continue to fight for these priorities through the appropriations process as FY25 plays out, and we begin to engage on FY26 as well. Our approach to federal legislation remains the same despite the new makeup of Congress. We advocate for common sense legislation that we always aim to make bipartisan. And I will leave it there and pass it back to Kim.
Great. Thanks very much, Allison. I'm going to turn it over to Kathy here momentarily to talk about some advocacy engagement. But before doing so, we have one other poll question just to get a sense of the type of interactions you've had with lawmakers thus far. And we should see the results here momentarily. Okay, great. Looks like a wide variety of engaging with lawmakers. So Kathy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Kim. And it's wonderful to know that we have a few seasoned advocates. And if you're new to advocacy, welcome. It really wouldn't be a proper legislative presentation without acknowledging you and your willingness to participate in the legislative process, because you arguably have the most powerful and persuasive voice, especially at the local and state level, where as a constituent, you can establish more of a personal relationship with your legislators and their staff. And we know that animal protection is a bipartisan issue, and legislation is one of the most proactive ways that you can create lasting, impactful change for animals. So thank you again for your willingness to be the voice for the animals. So we're going to just hop over to the next slide. And as we are mere weeks away from a new legislative session in most states and a new federal Congress, we want you to be as prepared as possible and empower you to contact your legislators as we work together on behalf of the animals. So we're going to run through some very quick tips for lobbying. Now, to begin with, you are going to need to know who represents you. And we've included a link here to find your legislators, your federal senators and representatives, your state senator and state assembly or House members, and your local legislators, your town council, county commissioners, etc. We're going to go to the next one. We're going to run through these very quickly. I know we're a little short on time and we want to have enough time for Q&A as well. So again, it's super important to be as prepared as possible during your outreach. And the good thing is that you can use our materials to do that research and review the issues. And again, know who represents you, but also as important, it's to understand your state's legislative process, how long the session is as well. Is it annual, every other year? Will you have 3 months, 6 months? Is it year round that you can lobby for issues? Because then we get into the actual lobbying. And when you do contact your elected officials, it's best to have clear and concise messaging on the topic. We really do want you to be direct and ask for a specific action. Speak from the heart. Tell your legislators why this issue or these issues are important to you, and then follow up with a thank you. And please know that even if the legislator doesn't agree with you on one issue, they may support another. So it is always important to retain a positive relationship. And then remain in communication with their office. That constant open line of communication is essential to building a trusted relationship. And some of those additional actions that you can take are to use social media. Share some of our action alerts with your friends and family to help create and sustain interest in a bill and an issue. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can certainly plan events and do some additional outreach, which we would be happy to help guide you on that. So please reach out to us if you'd like more information. And then we're getting into, this is my absolute favorite slide, your sphere of influence. Never underestimate who you know. People don't often think about their network, but if we expand a degree of separation or two, you really may have a vast network indeed. So let's all just take a moment to think about this. Do you know any influential community members? And they could be farmers, veterinarians, faith leaders, business owners, and they often have a persuasive voice in the community and their own connections. Or do you know someone who you may have a relationship with that is within an organization that may support one of our issues? This could be outside of the animal movement, and they may be a good ally or a coalition member. Even if you have one person that comes to mind who you can contact, it truly could be a game changer for our work on a particular campaign. So please do reach out if you think of someone in your sphere of influence. And we're just going to move right along here because these are some of the very, very basic best practices for you to utilize to be as prepared as possible when engaging your legislators and giving a bit of thought to your connections. And you can find our current legislative work on the webpage below that we have here. And we encourage you to sign up for our emails and action alerts. You can also see how your state ranks on the ALDF State Ranking Report. Now, this was quite an abbreviated version, so if you'd like more information, please let us know. And of course, we have some Lobby 101 and 2.0 webinars on our website as well. And of course, we always want to thank you so much and look forward to working with you in the new year.
Great, thanks so much for that, Kathy. We'd love to open it up to Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. So we're back to our gallery view. And if you do have questions, please feel free to go ahead and submit them. Let's see. So we've got a few rolling in to start. One is a question about where else we're planning to work on retail sales bans for next year.
I can take that one, Kim. I'd be happy to. First, can I just say I probably should have mentioned that New York was the 8th state to enact a retail sales ban, joining Vermont, Maine, Maryland, Illinois, Washington, Oregon, and California. And there are nearly 500 localities nationwide that prohibit the sale of dogs and cats in pet stores. So for our organization and our team, we anticipate working on puppy mill issues in Massachusetts, Texas, Nevada, New Jersey again. And as Lindsay had mentioned, we do expect to work on a defensive preemption measure in Missouri.
Great, thank you for that, Kathy. We have a question here as well about dog breed discrimination. Wondering if there's any work being done regarding renters' rights and discrimination against dogs being part of the family. Most rentals don't allow dogs, leading to less people being able to adopt. Could this be considered discrimination? Can you take us through that one? I can say that we have done some work. Jennifer, I see you jumping in, so I'll let you go ahead and go.
Yes, I was going to speak kind of generally to the work we've done in pets in housing that really bubbled up during COVID. And we've just continued with that as one of our strategic priorities. This takes shape in a lot of different ways, but looking to exclude breed-specific legislation that would exclude certain breeds from renters insurance, homeowners insurance, that sort of thing that gets at the issue the questioner is asking about broadening the scope of who's able to rent based on what four-legged members of their family they have.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. And I think one thing that's helpful too is that we're seeing, just from a trending perspective, breed-specific ordinances being repealed, and of course, the housing space is a bit different or distinct, I should say. But I think we're moving in the right direction in terms of ordinances and statutes that impact specific breeds. A question from a law student in DC. How can law students get involved while in school? For those in DC, are there volunteer opportunities? Speaking just generally, we have an animal law program that works with our student chapters. So if you have a student chapter at your school, that is probably the easiest way to become involved. Just about every law school in the country now has an animal law course at least, and our student chapters are continuing to grow. So there are lots of opportunities there, but certainly, in participating in some of the advocacy events that we discussed earlier would be a great way to become involved. And Allison may know a little bit more about some of the DC area specific law schools, but I do think there are opportunities to support some of the local initiatives occurring in DC. Allison, not sure if you have any more you might want to say on that.
Yeah, just jumping in, DC Voters for Animals is a great resource, and they are always working on different campaigns, actually working on one right now regarding pets and housing. There might be octopus farming coming up in the next session, so I think reaching out to Max Broad for DC Voters for Animals would open up a whole host of opportunities.
Great, thanks, Allison. We have a question from someone in Australia asking about the power of local council representatives, assuming the setup there is somewhat similar here to the US, where it's a city councilor, a county council member, and looks like this person's planning to meet with their councilor to ask about support for federal work. Council members typically are limited in their ability to influence legislation at their local level, which is really a great opportunity because it's often a faster process to enact legislation. That said, just going back to Kathy's sphere of influence, local council members may have connections with those working at your state or larger territory levels or federally as well. So even if they don't have the ability to enact that change, that could still be a very good starting point and an excellent contact to begin a conversation about how you might be able to impact change at a higher level as well. Let's see. Got a few others rolling in. Sorry, some of these are quite long, so trying to get the gist of them. And just a few comments coming in as well. I've got a question about octopus farming. Do you believe the ban on octopus farming in California or any state or national moves this farming to countries with no or little resources and money to police inhumane farming practices? Why not keep the farming in the US where there's oversight and advocacy? Jennifer, you want to jump in?
What I would say to that actually is there's really a global movement against octopus farming. And what I think the US advances in the state legislation have done is kind of get the ball rolling. And I think that is definitely influencing lawmakers in other countries who are taking note. I've heard there may be a ban coming in the UK, and it will continue to, I think, just snowball. So I wouldn't say that it's a wasted effort to pass legislation here when the farming isn't being developed here and rather it's in other countries. And are we just pushing it to a place that it would be worse overall? But I think we have the power to potentially influence worldwide trends on this. So I think it's still well worth the effort.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. And I'm going to keep it with you because this one's out of Texas. Would it be possible to have a high school student chapter? This is coming from a vet science teacher in Texas, and perhaps some opportunities to work with high school students.
A student chapter of the Animal Legal Defense Fund at the high school level. I think that's something maybe we would have to consider in our animal law program. I know it's not law, it's more general at that level of education, but I would say we take all comers, right? We're not turning away anyone who has an interest in helping our issues. So reach out to us, let us know what it is you think you could contribute, and then look for updates from us specific to your geographic area. Get on our email list because we'll be sending out action alerts as it relates to specific bills and needs we have as the session gets going. So once it hits January, the floodgates open and things will start picking up. And it's great to have a wide and vast, diverse network of individuals who are willing to contribute in various ways.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. And I think any on the team who have worked with our local shelters as part of our work can answer this one, but please share a best practice standard to engaging local animal shelters in our advocacy issues. It's so important to have a great partnership in sharing anti-cruelty legal awareness using their platforms as well.
I can jump in on that one too. It's so important to have a strong coalition, and the shelter community, they've always been great partners in so many states that we work in. They do have a bit of a balance there because they are C3 nonprofits, so they have to know how much lobbying they can do. But certainly sharing action alerts with their members on specific issues that are relevant to the work that they do and for animal protection would be wonderful. And again, there's such great partnerships that we have with local shelters and again, their supporters. So there's a lot of work that can be done together.
Great. Thanks so much, Kathy. We're just about at time. There were a few questions we didn't quite get to. Please do feel free to submit those to info@aldf.org if you'd like to discuss those with any of our staff. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Megan and just express my thanks once again to everyone joining us today. I know it's such a busy time of year. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Thank you, Kim. That was a great presentation, and thank you to the entire Legislative Affairs team for spending some time with us today and sharing some of these wonderful and amazing stories of success. And thank you to everyone out there for joining us today, which is our final webinar of 2024. You will be able to view a recording of this webinar along with our other past webinars on our website at www.aldf.org/webinars. And yeah, if we didn't get to your question, feel free to reach out. You can also always email our events team at events@aldf.org. And we do ask if you will please take the survey that's going to pop up on your screen to help us in future planning. You might need to click a blue continue button to access it. And finally, please know how much we appreciate your ongoing support for the animals. We can't do this alone. We need each of you as we continue fighting and looking ahead to 2025. So until next time, thank you for being a part of the Animal Legal Defense Fund community. Have a great day, everyone.